After 3,000 years, from the ashes of Earth, humans return for retribution. Part 1. The Last Memory of Earth. The sky above Earth was green that night, not the soft green of forests or the pale green of shallow ocean water. It was a sick, burning green, the kind that came from alien weapons tearing through the atmosphere like paper. Clouds turned to fire. Mountains cracked. The oceans boiled from the edges inward, sending walls of steam so high they looked like new continents rising from the sea. On the surface, people ran. They screamed. They held each other. Some prayed to gods who did not answer. Others simply stood still and looked up, too shocked to move, watching the sky fall apart above them. Do stood on the command deck of the Vreth flagship, Eternal Dominion, and watched it all through the wide observation glass. He was not smiling, he was not angry. He was completely calm, the way a man is calm when he is doing something he has already decided is necessary. His gray uniform was pressed. His hands were folded behind his back. He watched Earth burn the same way a person watches rain fall, without feeling, without regret. "Completion estimate?" he asked. 14 hours, Supreme Admiral, said the officer beside him. The crust will be fully destabilized by then. Nothing will survive. Do-on nodded once. Good. That was all he said. The Vreth Empire had debated the destruction of Earth for 60 years. Humanity had been a problem since the moment they reached the stars. They did not bow easily. They did not accept the Vreth's terms without argument. They built weapons faster than expected. They formed alliances with species the Vreth had already broken and controlled. Worst of all, they kept surviving things that should have ended them. Plagues, wars, economic collapse. Every time the Vreth pushed, humanity pushed back harder. So the decision was made. Earth would be removed. Cleanly, completely. The human colonies scattered across nearby star systems were small and weak. Without Earth, without their home, without the heart of their civilization, they would fall apart on their own. They would fade. In a few generations, humans would be a memory. In a few centuries, not even that. Do believed this completely. He was wrong. 43,812 people survived the fall of Earth. They were not soldiers. They were not heroes. Most of them were ordinary people. Teachers, doctors, farmers, engineers, children, who happened to be on the right ships at the right moment when the Vreth fleet arrived. 3 colony vessels had been preparing for departure that week, loaded with supplies and settlers, bound for a new world, 2 star systems away. When the attack began, the captains of those ships made a decision in seconds. They did not go back down to help. There was nothing to help. They pointed their ships away from Earth, away from the Vreth fleet, and they ran. They ran for a long time. The first year was the hardest. The 3 ships, First Breath, Long Road, and Pale Star, drifted through the dark between star systems with no destination, no plan, and no real hope. People cried constantly in those early weeks. Children asked for parents who were not there. Old people sat in corners and stared at walls. The grief was so heavy it felt like gravity, pressing down on every person, on every ship. But humans, even broken ones, do not stay still for long. A woman named Rena was 22 years old when Earth died. She had been on the First Breath as a junior navigation officer, barely 2 months into her first real assignment. She was not special. She was young and scared, and her hands shook every time she thought about her family back on Earth. Her mother, her 2 brothers, her grandmother who made rice cake every Sunday morning. They were all gone. She knew it. She accepted it faster than most people around her did, not because she felt less, but because she understood something the others were still too hurt to see. Grief would not keep them alive. Pain would not keep them alive. Only work would keep them alive. Only moving forward would keep them alive. So she worked. She started small. fixing a navigation error no one else had noticed, recalculating their fuel burn to extend their range by 3 weeks. Then she started talking to the engineers, learning things outside her specialty. Then she started talking to the captains of the other 2 ships, sharing ideas, pointing out problems before they became disasters. By the time she was 25, people were listening to her without being asked. By the time she was 30, the 3 ships followed her decisions without question. She was not given a title. She did not ask for one. She simply became the person everyone looked to, and she never looked away from the responsibility. The survivors found an asteroid belt in an unnamed system far outside Vref territory in the 3rd year of their journey. It was cold and dark and completely empty of any life, which was exactly what they needed. They stopped there. They built. At first they built to survive, shelters inside the larger rocks, water reclamation systems, basic farms under artificial light. The work was brutal. People died from accidents, from illness, from the cold. Every death was felt by everyone because there were so few of them left. Every funeral was a reminder of how close to nothing they had become. But they kept building. Taesung was an engineer on the long road, a quiet and serious man of 40 who rarely spoke unless he had something worth saying. He became the backbone of every construction project in those first years. He could look at a broken machine and understand what it needed the way some people understand music, naturally, instinctively. He designed the first permanent habitat in the asteroid belt from nothing but salvaged ship parts and raw rock. It was ugly and cramped, and it leaked cold air from 3 places, but it held. It stood. People lived inside it and stayed warm. He called it Home 1. The name was simple. Taesung liked simple things. As the years passed, Home 1 became a cluster of habitats. The cluster became a station. The station grew into something that almost looked like a small city, hanging in the dark between the rocks. Children who had been born on the ships ran through corridors that had not existed when they were born. New children were born inside the asteroid belt and had never seen a planet at all. For them, the dark and the cold and the hum of recycled air was simply normal. But they all knew about Earth. Every child was told. Every child grew up with the stories. The blue sky, the rain, the oceans, the cities, the warmth of a real sun on real skin. They were told what the Vreth had done. They were told clearly and without softening, because Rena believed that forgetting was more dangerous than pain. Remember everything, she told them. All of it. The beauty and the loss. Remember it and carry it. They did. 3,000 years later, they would carry it all the way back. After 3,000 years, from the ashes of Earth, humans return for retribution. Part 2. The Forge of 3 Millennia. 3,000 years is a long time. It is long enough for rivers to change course, for mountains to wear down to hills, for languages to die and new ones to be born. It is long enough for entire civilizations to rise, shine brilliantly for a few centuries, and then collapse into dust that no one remembers. 3,000 years is so long that most living things in the galaxy could not truly understand it. They could say the number, but they could not feel it. Humans felt it. Every generation of humans born in the dark between the stars carried it with them. It was in the stories they told their children at night. It was in the songs they sang during long work shifts when the artificial lights dimmed to save power. It was carved into the walls of every habitat, every ship, every station they ever built. Sometimes in words, sometimes in images, sometimes just in the rough shape of a planet with one large moon, scratched by someone's hand into cold metal. Earth. We came from there. They took it from us. We remember. That was the foundation everything was built on. The first 3 centuries were purely about survival. There was no time to think about war or revenge, when people were dying from contaminated water, when the growing systems kept failing, when ships broke down and there were not enough parts to fix them properly. The early generations worked themselves to exhaustion every single day just to keep the community alive. Rena's descendants, her children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, led in the same way she had, quietly, practically, with their hands in the work alongside everyone else. But even in those hard early years, something was being built alongside the habitats and the farms and the water systems. Knowledge. Every piece of technology the survivors had brought from Earth was studied, taken apart, understood completely, and then improved. Engineers like Tae-sung had started this in the very first years, and it became a tradition that never stopped. Nothing was used without being fully understood. Nothing was accepted as finished. There was always a better way, a stronger material, a more efficient design, and the humans of the asteroid belt found it, generation after generation, with the quiet and relentless focus of people who had nothing else to spend their energy on. They had no entertainment empires to distract them, no political games on a grand scale, no comfortable life that made hard thinking unnecessary. They had dark and cold and work and the memory of Earth. And from those four things, they built something extraordinary. By the 6th century, the asteroid belt community had grown to over 4 million people. The habitats had expanded into a full network of connected stations, mining operations, and small manufacturing centers. They had developed new alloys from the asteroid rock that were stronger than anything they had brought from Earth. They had built faster engines by studying and improving the ones they arrived with. A young engineer named Bora, 18 years old, born on the station, never seen a planet in her life, designed a new type of power cell that doubled the energy output of their ships while using half the fuel. She did it in her spare time, working on a small tablet in her bunk after her regular work shift was done. Bora was not unusual. She was normal by the standards of her generation. Most young people worked like that, always thinking, always building, always trying to make something better. It was cultural. It was how they were raised. It was what the community valued above everything else. Tae-sung's legacy was not just in the structures he built. It was in the mindset he had helped create, that every problem had a solution, and the solution was always worth finding. The real turning point came in the 9th century, when a scout ship picked up the wreckage of a Vreth patrol vessel drifting at the edge of a nearby system. The patrol ship was old, centuries old, and completely dead. No survivors, no power, just cold metal floating in the dark. No one knew what had destroyed it. It did not matter. What mattered was what was inside it. Vreth technology. A man named Raiwan led the team that boarded the wreck. He was a weapons researcher, practical and careful, with a reputation for being almost impossible to excite. But when he cut open the weapons bay of the dead Vreth ship and saw what was inside, he stood completely still for nearly a full minute. Then he said, very quietly, "We need to study every single piece of this." They did. It took 2 generations of researchers to fully understand the Vreth energy weapon systems. The technology was impressive, tight, efficient, powerful. Vreth engineers were not stupid, but human engineers had spent 9 centuries developing their own approaches, their own ways of thinking about energy and force and material science. And when they laid their understanding on top of the Vreth designs, they found gaps. Places where the Vreth approach was limited by assumptions the Vreth designers had never thought to question. Humans questioned everything. By the time the research was complete, they had not simply copied the Vreth weapons. They had rebuilt them from the ground up, using their own methods. And the result was something considerably more powerful. A Vreth energy cannon could punch through standard hull plating at close range. The human version which Raiwan's team named simply the Cutter, could do it at 3 times the range and twice the speed. Raiwan tested the first working model personally. He fired it at a decommissioned section of old hull plating they had set up as a target. The plating did not just crack, it evaporated. He wrote in his report, "They destroyed our home with their weapons. We will return the favor with better ones." By the 15th century, the population had grown to over 60 million. By the 20th, over 300 million. The community was no longer just an asteroid belt operation. They had spread to several nearby systems, always staying far outside Vreth territory, always staying quiet, always staying hidden. They built no beacons. They sent no signals. They left no trails. The galaxy did not know they were there, and that was exactly how they wanted it. A woman named Hana changed what human bodies could do. She was a biologist and medical researcher who lived in the 22nd century after Earth's fall. She was small and spoke softly and spent most of her life in a laboratory, but her work reached into every human body born after her time. She developed a series of biological treatments, not the clumsy genetic editing of early science, but something refined and precise and deep, that improved human endurance, reaction time, resistance to illness, and recovery from injury. The changes were not dramatic. Humans did not become giants or monsters. They simply became better at surviving, better at fighting, better at functioning under extreme conditions. Her most important work was something she called the long mind, a treatment that slowed certain aging processes in the brain, preserving sharpness and memory and focus well into old age. Commanders and engineers and researchers could now remain at the peak of their ability for decades longer than before. Hana herself lived to 141 years old, sharp and working until the final months of her life. She left behind a humanity that was physically tougher, mentally sharper, and more dangerous than anything the Vreth had ever encountered. The fleet was built over the final 5 centuries before the return. Not quickly, not carelessly. Each ship was designed, tested, redesigned, and tested again. They built 700 warships in total, each one carrying cutter weapons, new armor plating, engines that could sustain speeds the Vreth considered impossible, and crews trained from childhood to operate them under any condition. Commander Rena, not the original Rena, but a descendant who carried her name as both honor and responsibility, stood on the bridge of the undying sun as the last ship joined the fleet. She looked out at the formation through the observation glass. 700 ships, millions of crew, thousands of years of work and grief and survival, and stubborn, unbreakable will. She thought about the first Rena, standing on a ship at 22 years old, watching Earth die, hands shaking. "We're ready," she said quietly. No one argued. After 3,000 years, from the ashes of Earth, humans return for retribution. Part 3. The galaxy does not recognize them. The Vreth Empire had not thought about humans in over 2,000 years. Why would they? The problem had been handled. Earth was gone. The small human colonies that had existed at the time of the destruction had faded exactly as predicted. Without their homeworld, without their center, they had collapsed within a few centuries. The Vreth had checked. Their long-range intelligence networks had found nothing. No human signals, no human ships, no human presence anywhere in known space. Humanity was finished. The galaxy had moved on. The Vreth Empire of the present day was vast and old and deeply comfortable in its power. It controlled over 400 star systems. It commanded the largest military fleet in the known galaxy. Dozens of species lived under its authority. Some willingly, most not, but all of them quietly. Because the Vreth had long ago made the cost of resistance very clear. The Empire was not cruel in an obvious way. It did not torture for fun. It simply made rules, enforced them without exception, and removed anything that threatened the order it had built. It had been doing this for so long that no one seriously believed anything could challenge it anymore. Fleet Commander Borak was a man shaped by that confidence. He was middle-aged by Vreth standards, which meant he had served in the military for over 60 years, and in all that time he had never fought a real battle. Patrol actions, yes. Suppression operations against weak species who briefly forgot their place, yes. But a real battle, against an enemy that could actually fight back, never. No one in the current Vreth military had. When the long-range sensors picked up an unregistered fleet entering Vreth border space, Borak's first reaction was mild annoyance, not alarm. Probably smugglers, maybe a new species that had stumbled into the wrong area without knowing better. He took his patrol squadron, 12 ships, more than enough for any reasonable situation, and went to have a look. What he saw made him stop completely. 700 warships hung in formation in the dark, not scattered, not drifting, in perfect, disciplined formation, shaped like a wide arrowhead, pointed directly toward the heart of Vreth territory. The ships were unlike anything in the Vreth's records. The design was strange, angular, with hull materials that did not reflect sensor scans clearly. Borak's systems could not get clean readings on them. They could not count weapon systems. They could not measure power output. The ships seemed to absorb the scans rather than reflect them. This was the first thing that made him uneasy. He opened a communication channel. Standard Vreth command protocol. Identify yourself, state your origin and purpose, and submit to inspection. There was a pause of about 10 seconds. Then the response came. No words, just an image. It was a picture of a planet burning. Green fire from above, oceans boiling, continents cracking. And in the corner of the image, small but perfectly clear, a single symbol. The old human planetary flag, the one that had flown on Earth before the fall. Borak stared at the image for a long moment. He had studied history. Every Vreth military officer did. He knew about Earth. He knew it had been destroyed over 3,000 years ago by Supreme Admiral Do'On's order. He knew humans had been eliminated as a threat. But here in front of him were 700 ships. Sir, said his communications officer slowly, I'm getting a name from their fleet signature. The lead ship is called Undying Sun. Borak made a decision. The same decision any Vreth commander in his position would have made, shaped by 60 years of unopposed authority and 2,000 years of unchallenged empire. He ordered his squadron to attack. It was the last order he ever gave. The battle lasted 11 minutes. That was not a battle, in any real sense of the word. A battle suggests two sides fighting with some chance of outcome going either way. What happened in those 11 minutes was not that. A test that the humans did not need to run, but ran anyway, because it was important to be certain. Commander Rena stood at the bridge of the Undying Sun and watched it all with calm, steady eyes. She did not sit down. She did not grip the railing. She simply stood and watched and gave orders in a level voice, the same way a person speaks when they are doing something they have prepared for their entire life. 3 of her ships moved forward to engage Borak's squadron. Just 3. The other 697 held position. The Vreth opened fire first. Their weapons were powerful by the standards of the current galaxy. Energy beams that could cut through most known hull materials in seconds. They hit the 3 human ships directly. The shots landed. The shields on the human ships absorbed them without failing, not without effort. The energy readings spiked hard, but they held. The human ships did not fire back immediately. They waited 3 seconds. Later, when analysts reviewed the battle recording, they would argue about why the human ships waited those 3 seconds. Some said it was a sensor calibration pause. Some said it was a deliberate psychological choice. One old researcher said simply, they wanted Borak to understand what was happening before it ended. They wanted him to have 3 seconds of knowing. Then the cutters fired. Each human ship carried 16 cutter cannons. In those 3 seconds, the targeting systems had already locked onto every Vreth vessel simultaneously. When the order came, all 48 cutters from 3 ships fired in a single coordinated burst. 11 minutes, and that was being generous. Most of the actual destruction happened in the first 40 seconds. The Vreth squadron did not retreat. There was no time to retreat. There was barely time to understand what was happening. The energy released by the cutter barrage did not just pierce the Vreth hulls. It destabilized their power cores. The ships did not simply break apart. They dissolved at the points of impact, metal turning to superheated gas, the structural integrity of each vessel collapsing from the inside outward. When it was over, there was nothing left of Borak's squadron but drifting particles and the faint thermal signature of energy already cooling in the dark. Rena looked at the sensor display for a moment. "Send the image again," she said. "Broadcast it on all frequencies. Make sure everyone in the sector receives it." Her communications officer, a young man named Xianwu, looked at her. "The burning Earth image, Commander." "Yes," she said, "and add a new message underneath it." "What message?" Rena thought for a moment. Then she said, "We remember everything." The effect across the sector was immediate. Long-range communication was fast in the modern galaxy. Vreth relay networks carried signals across star systems in hours. Within a day, every major Vreth military installation in the border region had received the broadcast. Within 3 days, it had reached the Vreth home system. The reaction was not panic. Not yet. The Vreth High Council reviewed the battle data with the careful coldness of people who had governed a powerful empire for a very long time. They looked at the numbers. 12 patrol ships lost in 11 minutes to 3 vessels of an unknown design. Significant, yes. Concerning, yes. But 12 patrol ships was not the empire. It was not even a real loss in military terms. They sent a larger force. 2 full battle groups, 80 warships under the command of a senior admiral named Vorath, the most experienced combat commander the Vreth currently had. They received the same result. Faster, actually. Rena sent 6 ships that time. The engagement lasted 4 minutes. The galaxy watched on long-range sensors and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The math was not complicated. The Vreth had the largest fleet in known space, and it was not enough. Whatever these ships were, whatever these people were, they were something the galaxy had not seen before. Species under Vreth control began to whisper to each other in careful, quiet words. Something was happening. Something had come back from a place everyone thought was dead and gone forever. A human fleet was moving through Vreth space, and it was not stopping. And somewhere in the records of a dozen different alien civilizations, old historians were pulling up ancient files, wiping dust from entries that had not been read in centuries, and reading the name of a small blue planet that had once, a very long time ago, been considered too stubborn to eliminate safely. They had been right to be worried. They had just been 3,000 years too early. After 3,000 years, from the ashes of Earth, humans return for retribution. Part 4. Retribution has a name. Word travels fast when the thing traveling is fear. The human fleet crossed into the second ring of Vreth border systems. Every species under Vreth control already knew what was happening. They passed the information the way the oppressed always pass dangerous information. Quietly, in pieces, through back channels and whispered conversations, and coded messages that look like something else. A merchant ship from the Dalvu people told a dock worker on a supply station. The dock worker told his family. His family told their neighbors. Within days, the story had spread through dozens of occupied worlds, like water finding cracks in stone. Humans, Earth, 3,000 years, coming back. Most species did not believe it at first. It sounded like a story people told themselves when they needed hope, and had none left. The Vreth had been in power for so long that the idea of something genuinely threatening them felt almost impossible to hold in the mind. You could believe it the way you believe a myth, with a kind of distant, wistful feeling, but not the way you believe something real. Then the battle recordings leaked. No one knew exactly how they spread. Some said a Vreth communications worker copied the data and passed it on. Some said the humans themselves released it deliberately. Either way, within 2 weeks of the first engagement, the full recordings of both battles were being watched on hidden screens in cramped rooms on 100 occupied worlds. 60 years of work by Vreth's psychological control, dismantled in 2 weeks by 11 minutes of combat footage. The whispers stopped being quiet. Junho was not a man who enjoyed war. He understood this about himself clearly and without apology. He was a soldier, had been trained as one from the age of 12, had spent 30 years preparing for exactly this moment, but he felt no pleasure in it. Some soldiers loved the fight for its own sake, for the noise and speed and the sharp feeling of being alive in a dangerous moment. Junho was not like that. He fought because it was necessary. He did it as well as he possibly could, but he never confused necessity with something to enjoy. He thought about this as his landing craft dropped through the atmosphere of Surak 7, the first Vreth-occupied world the fleet had chosen for ground operations. Surak 7 had once belonged to the Beni, a species of tall, thin people with large eyes adapted to the dim light of their homeworld's perpetual cloud cover. The Vreth had taken it 180 years ago, killed roughly a third of the Beni population in the initial occupation, and spent the following decades turning the remaining population into a labor force, mining the planet's rich mineral deposits. The Beni who were alive now had been born into occupation. They had never known anything else. Junho's orders were precise and clear. Remove the Vreth garrison, secure the major settlements, and establish contact with the local population. No destruction of infrastructure. No harm to civilians of any species, including Vreth civilians. Military targets only. He read the orders twice before the landing, not because he needed to, but because he wanted the words to be solid in his mind before he stepped out of the ship. The Vreth garrison on Surak 7 had 3,000 soldiers and a network of automated defense towers ringing the main settlement. In normal terms, against any normal enemy, that was a significant defensive position. Against 1,200 human ground troops equipped with cutter-based personal weapons and armor developed from Hana's biological research program, it lasted about 6 hours. Junho led the first wave personally. He did not do this to be dramatic. He did it because his soldiers needed to see their commander moving forward, not watching from behind. He moved through the outer ring of defense towers with his team, disabling them one by one in a systematic sweep that Vreth tactical doctrine had no answer for. The Vreth had excellent defensive playbooks, but those playbooks assumed a certain level of enemy capability. Human capability was outside their reference entirely. The garrison surrendered before nightfall. Junho stood in the main square of the largest Beni settlement and watched the Vreth soldiers being disarmed and secured. He felt tired and focused, and already thinking about the next phase. Then the Beni started coming out of their buildings, slowly at first, 1 or 2 at a time, peering around corners, watching with those large, careful eyes. Then more of them, filling the streets gradually, standing at a cautious distance and staring at the human soldiers with an expression Junho had seen in historical images, but never in real life. It was the expression of people trying to believe that something good was actually happening. A Beni elder, a woman so old she moved with obvious pain, leaning on a carved wooden stick, walked slowly toward Junho through the parting crowd. She stopped in front of him and looked up at his face for a long moment. Then she said something in her own language. Otubro's translation device rendered it in a flat, mechanical voice. "Are you real? Are you actually here?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said simply. "We are here." She reached out and touched his arm with her thin hand, as if checking that he was solid. Then she made a sound that the translator could not render. Not a word, just a sound. And her shoulders dropped in a way that suggested something very heavy had been set down. Junho stood still and let her hold his arm for as long as she needed to. That night, 11 Beni community leaders met with him in the settlement hall. They asked who the humans were. They asked where they had come from. They asked what they wanted. Junho explained. Everything. Earth, the fall, 3,000 years, the fleet, the campaign. He kept it simple and honest. He did not make it dramatic, because it did not need to be. The truth was dramatic enough on its own. When he finished, the community leaders were quiet for a while. Then one of them, a middle-aged man with burn scars across his neck and collarbone, marks from some old punishment Junho did not ask about, leaned forward and said, "We want to help." Junho looked at him. "You do not have to." "We want to," the man said again, firmly. "The Vreth have done to us for 180 years what they did to you in one day. We want to help finish this." Junho considered this for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I will speak to Commander Rina." Rina received Junho's message on the undying sun and read it 3 times. She thought about it carefully. Adding allied forces from occupied species was not something the original mission plan had included. It added complexity. It required coordination across different communication systems, different languages, different levels of military training. But it also added something else. A human force liberating occupied worlds looked like revenge. A coalition of freed species and returning humans fighting together looked like something more than that. It looked like a statement the entire galaxy could read. She approved the request. Within the next 3 months, soldiers from 6 different species joined the human advance. The Beni were first. Then the Rule, a reptilian people who had been under Vreth control for over 400 years, and who fought with a ferocity born from long and patient hatred. Then the Osset, the Fanon, the Grau, and finally the Meki, a species so thoroughly broken by centuries of occupation that many people had assumed they had no fight left in them at all. They were wrong about the Meki. The coalition swept through Vreth-occupied space in a broad, coordinated advance that the Vreth High Council, for the first time in its long history, could not find an answer to. Every tactical response they tried had already been planned for. Every reinforcement they sent arrived too late. The humans were not fighting the way the Vreth expected enemies to fight, desperate and reactive, burning their strength fast and then slowing down. The humans were fighting with patience and precision, conserving where it was smart to conserve, hitting hard where hitting hard mattered. 3,000 years of preparation had produced something the Vreth had never faced before, an enemy that was better at war than they were. The Vreth High Council sent a ceasefire offer in the 5th month of the campaign. It was transmitted on a formal diplomatic frequency, written in careful language, offering a negotiated settlement. They proposed creating a neutral zone between human and Vreth territory. They offered reparations. They offered recognition of human sovereignty over several uninhabited star systems. Rina read the offer on her command deck. Hyunwoo watched her from his station, waiting. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said in a voice she kept perfectly steady, "Broadcast a response on all frequencies. I want every species in this region to hear it." "What is the response, Commander?" Rina looked out at the stars beyond the observation glass. She thought about the first Rina. She thought about Taesum and his ugly, leaking, beautiful first habitat. She thought about Hana, working alone in a laboratory, making humans harder to kill. She thought about Junho, standing in a settlement square, while an old woman checked that he was real. She said, "You had 3,000 years to offer peace. The time for offers is over." Hyunwoo entered the message and transmitted it. The ceasefire offer was never answered. After 3,000 years, from the ashes of Earth, humans return for retribution. Part 5. Ashes into Monuments. The Vreth Empire surrendered on a Tuesday. Not that the Vreth knew it was a Tuesday. They used a different calendar, a different measure of time, a different way of naming the days. But by the human calendar, the calendar that had survived 3,000 years of dark and cold and loss, it was a Tuesday morning when the final transmission came through. The Vreth Grand Council, speaking in the formal language of total capitulation, acknowledged defeat, accepted all terms, and surrendered unconditional authority over every occupied system they controlled. Commander Rena received the transmission on the bridge of the undying sun. She was sitting down for once in the command chair she rarely used. She had been awake for 22 hours. There were dark circles under her eyes and a cut on her left hand from a piece of debris that had bounced loose during the last major engagement. She had not had time to get it properly treated. She read the surrender document on her screen once, carefully, from beginning to end. Then she set the screen down on the armrest and looked at the crew around her. Hyunwoo at communications, her navigation team, her tactical officers, all the faces she had worked beside for years. They were looking back at her, waiting. "It's done," she said. No one cheered. That surprised some people later when they heard the story. They expected to hear that the bridge of the undying sun erupted in celebration the moment the word came through. But that was not what happened. The people on that bridge had carried the weight of 3,000 years of human survival, and when the moment finally arrived, what they felt was not the sharp, bright feeling of excitement. It was something deeper and quieter, something that sat heavy and warm in the chest, something that had no good name. Hyunwoo put his head down on his console and was still for a long moment. No one looked at him. Rena stood up, slowly, and walked to the observation glass. She looked at the stars for a long time. The fleet moved to Earth's coordinates 3 weeks after the surrender. Earth's solar system was easy to find. The star was the same. The orbital paths of the other planets were unchanged. The general shape of the system was familiar, from centuries of human star charts, and the collective memory of a people who had never stopped thinking of it as home. But where Earth itself should have been, there was only a wide band of dark rock and debris, the remnants of a planet's crust, pulverized and scattered by weapons powerful enough to break geology itself. The fleet dropped out of travel speed and stopped at a respectful distance. For a long time, no one spoke on any ship. Taesung, a young man, a direct descendant of the original Taesung, and a gifted atmospheric engineer who had inherited the family name along with the family talent, stood at his workstation on the long road and looked at the debris field on his screen. He had prepared for this moment for years. He had charts and models and calculations and plans. He had spent a decade of his life designing the systems that would begin Earth's restoration. He knew exactly what needed to happen and in what order and at what pace. He had thought, when this moment came, that he would feel ready. Instead, he felt very small. He stood there in silence for several minutes, staring at what remained of a planet he had never seen, that no living human had seen, that existed only in stories and old recordings, and the deep structural memory of a people defined by its loss. Then he straightened up, pulled up his workstation interface, and began entering the first commands of the restoration sequence. Starting atmospheric seed deployment, he said quietly into the shipcom. Initiating Phase 1. In the debris field, the first of thousands of small automated probes separated from the long road and began the slow, patient work of gathering, sorting, and repositioning rock. It would take centuries to rebuild Earth. Taesung knew this. He had always known this. The restoration would be finished by people not yet born, people who would look back at the work he started the same way he looked back at the first Taesung's first habitat. Ugly and imperfect and absolutely essential. He was fine with that. Hana was the one who set foot on the surface first. Not the original Hana. She had been gone for over 1,000 years. This Hana was her descendant, a biologist and restoration ecologist, who had dedicated her career specifically to the problem of rebuilding Earth's ecosystem from scratch. She was precise and serious in her work, but warm in a way that people who knew her well saw clearly, even if she did not always show it openly. The surface teams had identified a small area of the debris field where enough rock had already naturally recoalesced under gravity to form a rough, uneven ground, not a planet, not yet, not even close, but something solid enough to stand on. Technically, it was not Earth. Earth did not exist yet in any real form. But it was the material Earth had been made of, in the place Earth had been, and that was enough. Hana suited up in a full environment suit, checked her equipment 3 times, and took the short shuttle from the undying sun to the surface. When the shuttle hatch opened, and she stepped out onto the dark, rough ground, she stood still for a moment and looked around. There was nothing to see, just broken rock under a black sky, and the distant light of a familiar sun. No atmosphere, no wind, no sound of any kind, just cold and dark and silence. She knelt down and picked up a piece of the rock. It was rough and dark and small enough to hold in one hand. She turned it over slowly, looking at it. In this fragment of rock was iron that had once been at the core of a living world, silicate that had once been part of mountains, carbon that had once been part of forests, of oceans, of people. She put it in her sample bag carefully, as if it were fragile. Then she stood up and said into her comm, "I'm standing on Earth." There was a long silence on the channel. Then, one by one, voices came back from the fleet, from the undying sun, from the long road, from every ship in the 700, from the coalition vessels of the Beni and the Rule and the others. Not words at first, just sounds, acknowledgement, presence, the feeling of an entire people hearing something they had waited their whole lives, and more than their whole lives, to hear. Junho arrived 2 days later. He had been managing the transition operations on 3 liberated worlds, and had not been able to leave earlier. He came alone on a small shuttle, without announcement, without ceremony. He had not asked for one. He suited up and walked out onto the surface by himself. He walked for a while without any particular destination, which was fine, because there was no particular destination to have. The ground was rough and uneven, and completely silent under his boots. He could see the sun, small from this distance, but the right color, the right warmth through the suit's external temperature sensors. He stopped near a large formation of fused rock that jutted upward from the debris field at a slight angle, catching the sun at one edge. The glass-fused craters were everywhere, places where the heat of the Vreth weapons had been so intense that rock had melted and re-solidified into dark, smooth glass. They caught the light differently than the rough debris around them. They were, in a strange way, almost beautiful. Smooth, dark mirrors reflecting the stars. Junho stood at the edge of one of these craters and looked into it for a long time. He was thinking about the Beni Elder, about her hand on his arm, about the question, "Are you real? Are you actually here?" He thought about all the people on all the worlds who had spent their lives under the weight of Vreth occupation, and about all the humans who had spent 3,000 years in the dark, building toward this moment, and about the fact that it was over now. Not perfectly, not cleanly, because nothing was ever perfectly or cleanly over, but fundamentally, truly, finished. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said quietly, to the crater and the glass and the silence. We're here. Rena planted the first beacon herself. It was a simple device, a cylindrical post about a meter tall, made from the same asteroid alloy that had been building human civilization for 3,000 years, driven into the rock of the surface at the rough center of the debris field. It contained a transmitter, a power cell, and a data core loaded with the complete recorded history of humanity, from the day Earth died to the present moment. She pushed it into the rock with both hands and stood back. The beacon began to transmit immediately, as it was designed to do, a steady low-frequency signal going out in all directions, carrying the human flag and a single line of text in every language currently spoken in the known galaxy. Earth, we are home. In the months and years that followed, the work began in full. Taesung's restoration probes multiplied, filling the debris field with activity, slowly pulling the scattered material of a dead planet back toward a center of gravity. Hana's ecological research teams cataloged every fragment of biological material they could find in the debris. There was almost nothing, but almost nothing was more than nothing, and began the long process of reconstruction from the ground up. The Vreth, stripped of their empire and their power, began the slower and harder work of becoming something other than what they had been. Some of their people managed it. Many did not. That was not humanity's problem to solve. The freed species built their own futures. The Beni recovered their world. The Rule expanded into systems they had been denied for centuries. The Meki, who had surprised everyone with the fierceness of their fight, surprised everyone again with the gentleness of their peace. Life moved forward, which is what life does when it is finally allowed to. And on the slowly gathering mass of rock and debris in the place where Earth had been, work continued, day after day, generation after generation, patient, steady, and completely without doubt. Because humans had learned, in 3,000 years of dark and cold and survival, that the only way to do something that seems impossible is to begin, to continue, and to never ever stop. Earth would be reborn. Not today, not in 100 years, not in 1,000, but it would be reborn, because the people who carried it in their memory refused to let it stay dead. They had come from its ashes. They would build it back from the same material. And the galaxy, watching from a careful and respectful distance, understood at last what it should have understood 3,000 years ago. You do not destroy something that refuses to end. You do not silence something that keeps speaking across centuries. And you do not, under any circumstances, mistake patience for surrender, not when the patient thing is human.